Well, a dirty boy was running in the house, and came to his mom, and he goes, "Do you know who I am?" And his mom thought he was playing a game, and she said, "No, who are you?" And the little boy said, "Gee, Mrs. Williams was right. She said I was so dirty you wouldn't recognize me." Sometimes we get dirty like that. I used to get dirty like that, which when I think about who I am now and I think about the kid I was then, I find that amazing. Because if you've ever eaten around me, you'll know I'm a germphobe. I always, even way before COVID, for years, I have been supporting wet wipes. Yes, I should have bought stock in that company, especially before COVID hit. But yes, I always have had wet wipes. I get them out. I invite everyone to use them. I know a lot of you use hand sanitizer, and I'm real touching, and I don't like to feel that hand sanitizer that well, so I like the wet wipes. I feel like that's getting my hands nice and clean, and I like to make sure and not touch things. And I used to touch everything. I remember eating vegetables out of the garden. I know. I was like, I would never do that now. And so it's interesting about germs and how they impact us. And we know how germs have impacted us because we know that there's a lot of things we can't see. Now, when you look at this picture, I don't think that looks so bad, right? But that's some kind of terrible bacteria. You know, it's not COVID. I could have put COVID up there, but I think we've seen enough of that COVID virus. So I thought I'd put up some bacteria instead. But, you know, if you open the door to come into church today, yeah, I know. Grab the hand sanitizer. Use your wipes. I have wipes up here. Did you see me use them a little bit ago? I was like, oh, I don't think my hands are clean. I need to wash them off. Yeah, we get exposed all the time to germs, don't we? They're everywhere. And we know the cost of how damaging germs can be to us in different ways. And it's amazing that something we can't see, that's microscopic, elevated, can cause so much problem. And, you know, even today, it's not easy to overcome certain diseases. And I think you know what diseases are primary in our culture if you watch commercials. Have you seen, there's a lot of commercials right now for skin diseases. Now, leprosy has been cured, fortunately. They don't even call it leprosy anymore. They often call it, I think it's Hansen, but the doctor who discovered the cure for this bacteria, discovered the bacteria and a treatment for it, he is named for it now, and often people can recover easily. But there's still lots of terrible skin diseases out there that really are irritating. Just a few months ago in our own household, which I found this so surprising because I'm a lotion person and I'm a germphobe, so I take good care of my skin. But my husband had this terrible rash start breaking out. And his family, he was redheaded as a kid, and so his family has real delicate skin, and so his sister's a doctor. So we asked her, what do you think? And she said, you know, it's dry skin. You just use a lot of lubrication on it. And I was like, well, we were doing that, and it didn't seem to help, but we'll keep doing that. Your dad, I have the same thing, use that. Okay. So then it didn't work. He went to the doctor. They gave him prednisone. That kind of helped. And finally, he decided to listen to his wife and go to the dermatologist. And the dermatologist said, you have a bacteria on your skin. I was like, and it developed that way after all this. You need an antibiotic. I was so shocked. I was like, an antibiotic? And then he gave him a lotion that had alcohol in it to kill the surface bacteria, and he got over it. But I was like, wow, these skin diseases, I mean, he couldn't rest. It was he'd be in the night, if you'd wake up, he'd be scratching. It was horrible. And so I can imagine how horrible it would be with someone with leprosy. That disease is horrible. It numbs the nerves, and you don't feel things, so you injure yourself, and you start to degrade, your body starts to degrade. It's horrible. And so when people had leprosy, they would have to call out, leper, stay away. Now think about that during our COVID times. I mean, you know how hard it was during COVID for some people. If they had COVID, we had to take food to them and stuff. And that's the way it was for lepers. They had to isolate, but even worse, they had to call out if they were out and about to stay away from them. How would you like it if you had COVID to say, COVID, COVID, stay away? That'd be weird, wouldn't it? It was hard enough to get through the COVID with that. And some of us might have treated people with COVID like leprosy, i.e. me. Stay away, stay away. But I was trying to embrace it. It was really hard for me at the beginning being a germphobe because I had to do several funerals. And I'm a very huggy, touchy person, as you're learning. And it was hard because I still hug those people. And I'd be like, oh, and I have to go home and take a shower or something. But it was hard. And so it was really hard for some poor man like this. And so out of desperation, he comes up to Jesus and not asking, can you heal me, Jesus? But will you heal me, Jesus? And that's our question. Will we help? Will you help Jesus? Yes. And Jesus does something even so shocking to heal the man as he's healing the man, which he could have done without doing this. He touches the man. How far are you willing to go to help people? And the man was completely healed, and then he did what Jesus didn't want him to do. He went and told everybody about how awesome his healing was, so Jesus couldn't go out in public anymore. And Jesus continued to heal people by having them come to him because the leper had faith. He had faith that Jesus could do it. And like many of us, though, he struggled with, will you do it? Now, I have faith that God can do a lot of things, but I struggle, as I said, with God's willingness. But God is always willing to help us. Sometimes sometimes I've found what I pray for, not healings, but other things I've been praying for, that God knows they're not good for me, and so he's not going to give them to me. And I don't understand why some people aren't healed the way I want them to heal. I still struggle with that, and that'll be probably the first question I find out when I get to heaven. Why weren't these people healed? And maybe when I find out how awesome heaven is, the Lord will tell me, well, I had better things waiting for them, which is little comfort to me right now. It's little comfort to me in this world, isn't it? But I still keep trying to believe that. But what I find in my own life, because I am a germphobe, is how hard it is to be willing to help others. And also, I know that I'm very judgmental. I look at people's lives and I think, you got yourself in this hot mess. Maybe you ought to try to get yourself out. And maybe some of you think like that. So I'm not always willing. And so the Lord has to convict me that how many times I've got myself in a hot mess and the Lord had to help get me out, and he did. And I need to be willing to help others and not be so judgmental and leave the judgment up to him. So we're going to watch a video about healing next. It's called Restoration.
Sometimes it's moments of brokenness which create the greatest transformations. Times where fear gives birth to faith, pain leads to healing, and chaos dissolves into peace. It's in these times we often see God more clearly. For in our deepest turmoil, He remains faithful. When our spirit is crushed, He remains strong. When our moment is too heavy, He carries the burden. As gold is refined by fire, we too are often refined by struggle. It's part of growing, changing, becoming. Lately, the journey has been difficult. Our breath has been labored. Our steps uneasy. But we stand in faith, knowing who is leading us through this desert. The God of peace, the God of hope, the God of restoration.
So as people of faith who believe in that restoration, our invitation is, are we willing to speak truth in the midst of people's pain and in our midst of our own pain? Are we willing to say, yes, God is able and willing to help us, and God is at work? Remember, we've talked about this being the liminal time, and I think summer makes it feel even more liminal for me, that things are still kind of stagnant and it's hard to get things going. But our invitation is still to remain faithful and to continue to witness and to reach out to people, that there are people in need. And so if you have encountered people in need, what is the first thing and the number one thing you can do for them? Whether maybe you can financially meet their needs or help them by giving them money, but what is the number one thing we as people of faith should do for others? Pray, exactly. Do what Jesus always did. Jesus was a man who prayed all the time. He certainly went out. Now, we don't see him doing that at the moment of these things, but we have talked about seeing him pray at other times. I don't see him praying right before these healings, but he's gone away to pray before he encounters these people. He's filled himself up with the truth of who his Father is and who he is. And he is filled with the Holy Spirit to be able to do this. And so it's easy for our hearts to get callous, and it's easy for us to say, well, you got yourself into this mess. But how hard is it for us to stop and say a prayer for them right then? Right there at that moment, to pray with someone, or simply, and if you don't feel comfortable doing that, simply pray in your mind. Just asking God to help them and help you help them. Now, giving stuff to people isn't always the answer for people. Sometimes what they really need is a listening ear. Sometimes they just need to hear counsel. Sometimes they just need to be respected and have someone look them in the eye. I don't know how many people I can tell you that in East Peoria, we had a lot of people come in that needed help because we were a centrally located downtown church and people who were, and we had the food pantry, so people who were in need would come to our church. And a lot of times, of course, they wanted money, but sometimes what they wanted was simply someone to look them in the eye, to call them by name, and to pray with them. And at those times, it was really a powerful experience where I felt that, God, I hoped, was really helping them overcome their challenges. And it's hard sometimes, and I would challenge myself, why wasn't that the first thing I wanted to do? Why wasn't that? Because when did they come in? Of course, interruptions happen all the time, and that's exactly what Jesus dealt with. This man was interrupting his life, and I know when I'm busy, I don't always want to be interrupted, and fear also can make us hesitant. And you'd be surprised to know that what people at East Peoria would say to me was, Pastor Mary, we can't believe you're hugging that person. Because I would hug them, and sometimes I would be just doing it because I felt the need to do it, and sometimes I'd come away and I'm like, what did I do? Why was I hugging that person? Because of the germphobe I am. But then I'd be convicted, and I'd be like, that was what the Lord wanted me to do, was to touch them like Jesus touched them. And so I invite you this week, God is going to bring people into your life that you can help. And so who's that going to be? And here's a wonderful verse to remind you how faithful our God is as you challenge yourself about that. This is from Lamentations. The book of Lamentations is the woe book, we call it, of the Bible. I do anyway, because people were in grief. They had made some terrible choices by worshiping idols. They got themselves into it, and they were in a terrible state. And in the middle of their terrible state, like this leper was, they still reminded themselves of the truth of who God is. And that's our invitation, to remind others and remind ourselves of who God is. Lamentations 3 says this, even though I'm in the midst of this thing, this I will call to mind, and there I have hope. It is the Lord's mercy that I am not completely consumed, because his compassions do not fail. They are new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. Our God is compassionate and tenderhearted. His compassions never fail. He is renewing them every morning. That's how great our God is. And so our invitation is, how can we share that truth and that compassion with others? And it'll be someone unexpected. Who is untouchable in your life? Who is someone that you really kind of want to stay away from? That might be the person God is calling you to certainly pray for. If someone has come to your mind, that immediately you should be praying for them and yourself, and ask God to give you the courage and strength to reach out to them and help them if you are able. But more likely, the question isn't if you're able, but if you're willing. Our church tithes and does more than that in giving to meet the needs of people not only in our community, but down in other communities, other missionaries, and around the world. I mean, Dave comes in this week and brings in this big thing and a bill for $18,000. And I'm like, what? And then I remembered, no, we're givers. And so give it away, because we're giving to meet needs. And so our invitation is, our church has that as a foundation, that we're people who give to meet needs. But I hope today, this day, you'll be convicted to say, how can I personally help someone else? How can I become more willing? God is always willing to help me. God is always willing to help others. And we, as Christ people, are invited to help out in the community and out into the world. But mostly, who can I pray for? Who could I pray for? And who then could I possibly give a willing listening ear to? But who also maybe I'm called to touch? Who feels like an outcast that I might be called to just reach out and touch in a loving, Christ-like manner? I know with COVID and everything, we probably shouldn't be hugging yet and doing that kind of thing, but still, you can still touch someone on the arm and give them the power of your presence with them. So who can you extend mercy to? Who is it? It's not someone far away. It's someone close at hand. So who is it that God is calling you to help? And then the invitation always is, are you willing? Let's pray together. Loving and gracious